Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome back to this episode of Professor Game Podcast. Today we have a repeat guest. You've heard probably of Pete Jenkins before, but before we get started, we have a specific topic today, Pete. But are you prepared to engage?
Always prepared to engage.
Let's do this because Pete, as you know, he's been before on the podcast. If you want the full intro, you can go into the show notes. You can go into another of the episodes. But you know, he is an authority on gamification. He's a learner. He's an entrepreneur. He's a lecturer. He's the CEO of Gamification Plus. And he is also the Chair of Gamification Europe, that annual conference for gamification practitioners, which is coming up. If you're hearing this episode, it is coming up very, very soon in November in 2020. And of course, given the whole circumstances in the world, it is going to be held online. He's also part of the GamFed. He's a lecturer in many places. So I'm not going to get too deep into that. Is there anything you want to highlight before we get started, Pete?
I know only that I highly recommend people don't take on as many jobs as I do.
That's a sound recommendation for sure. Sometimes getting too busy sounds like you're a very important person, and you probably are, but it also has a toll on each and every one of us for sure. So Pete, we are here today probably to focus on Gamification Europe. And we were talking about this in the pre-interview chat. We always look at the new things when we're talking about conferences and events, like, oh, what's new this year? And we always talk about that. But this year, I would argue it's new, like really new. It's new, right?
New.
So, it's different. It's not just, oh yeah, this year we have a different topic, which you probably have as well. There's many things going on that are very, very different this year. So why don't we get started with the topic of the conference and then take it from there?
Okay. Well, this year it's pretty obvious that everything is very different, as you were saying, different. And I quickly worked out that I wanted because I always come up with a topic for the conference. As you know, it's been a sequence. The first one was a hero's journey. It was about overcoming obstacles. Then we had from player to professional, which was all about how the gamification industry is maturing. And we're seeing best practices and more academic research backing things up. Then last year, actually, we took it really on and we were like, what's the future of gamification look like? And then, of course, this year, how on earth do you follow the future anyway? And then with COVID and everything else going on, it occurred to me that disruption would be the theme. And I ran it by the first few people who were interested, and it just resonated with everyone. And by disruption, I mean two different things, really. One is like, I was looking originally for talks from people about how maybe gamification helps them or their organizations survive the disruption around them or even thrive in it. Because I think that's been a big impact for lots of people now. I mean, at the start of this year, e-learning, for instance, was a big topic. But by this point in the year, everyone has to do it. Yeah. And so gamified e-learning, people are realizing that e-learning itself, much of it is not that good and not that effective. So they're having to up their game. So there's some disruption going on there. And then from the other side of disruption, I always like where we can find examples of gamification disrupting whole industries or whole processes. So people who've been working on stuff anyway, and then saying, hey, look, this is how we gamify and disrupted this industry. I remember last year, one of my favorite talks was from Xavier, who was talking about how they gamified a honey trap for hackers to make it more engaging so that hackers would stay on the site for even longer so they'd learn more about the hacker. And for me, that was like, that's disrupting. And it's also expanding where we see the use of gamification. So
absolutely.
Yeah, disruption. And in fact, everyone I've spoken to, it's resonated in some way, whether positive or negative. It certainly seems to hit the chord. So disruption.
I mean, 2020 is probably disruption as a topic in general, I would say. So I think it is definitely very appropriate. And we were also, I'm also involved as last year in Gamification Europe. Not as much, to be honest. Last year, I was doing a lot more things. This year has been a bit crazy for me. personally and professionally. So I haven't been as involved. I probably would have enjoyed to help out a bit more, but I know that there's different topics for each day, and that's something that is already different, right? You used to have you had tracks at some point and something like that, but this time it's a complete structure around each day. So how does it look like? What are the days? How many days is the conference lasting?
So this is it, you see, because one of the things I like about disruption is it's an opportunity for change and it's an opportunity for experimentation. So one of the things I've always wanted to do at Gamification Europe was actually focus each day on a particular sector. And I always struggled because there were so many sectors that gamification applies to, and it's only a 2-day conference. So I couldn't really do it. The closest we got was the first year with tracks. But the second year, the venue didn't lend itself to tracks. We had just one big room, which was a lot of fun, but no tracks. And last year, we had another track, but basically it was for workshops, and rather than a different theme or sector focus, because the layout lent itself to that. So by going online this year, I was like, well, there's no reason for not having a longer conference, because people don't have to travel, they don't have to pay for accommodation. And then this is the way I work, but I attended a lot of conferences and I've spoken at quite a few, all of them in different platforms. And what a wonderful industry that is to be in at the moment, in terms of so many different things people are trying. I've been speaking on platforms like Hopin. We're going to use one called Remo. There's one called Run the World. There's a few VR ones. There's so many different approaches. After attending so many of these, including 1 week where they had 160 talks over a week, and it was too intense. And I realized that no one can handle that much screen time. So the key thing I decided was I didn't want anyone to be staring at the screen for more than 2 hours at a time. And so I've set the conference up across 5 whole days, but the whole day is actually 5 hours, where it's 2 hours of content, make you have a lunch break, 2 hours of content. So you're supposed to leave the screen at that point. We will have an area set up for those people who want to network and eat their lunch while chatting to other people during that hour, because why not? But generally, I want people to get up and move around. And I want a chance to do that as well.
Yeah, to be able to, that's part of the conferences in general. Like, one of the reasons you go to a conference is to be able to see and meet and greet other people. So, that it is a very important opportunity. And I'm hearing that you're giving that opportunity still in the online world, which we're getting a lot more used to in the past few months. So how's that looking?
I agree. Okay. Because the reason I set up the event is to build the community and expand the community, the gamification community, so we can learn from each other. And as well as listening to talks, that means we've got to meet each other. So the platform I've chosen for the conference, I've focused on the networking first, to be fair. So the visual layout is nice. We're all sitting around virtual tables. So in essence, we can be in mini Zoom calls of 6 people. We can, I've got another room set up with a cafe area, and even the sponsors have their own tables. People can go and chat to them, or the exhibitors, that sort of thing. And it's even got like a speed networking feature built in. So, and if anyone volunteers to be part of that, they just literally hit a button and say, oh, I'm ready to meet someone new. And every 3 minutes, it automatically sends them off to meet someone new. So, and that's just for your extroverts, really. So it's a voluntary thing.
Or for the introverts who want a challenge as well.
Yeah, or the introverts who press the wrong button. There's lots of different reasons.
I mean, it's an interesting way as well. I mean, if you've seen anything on introverts, the whole awkwardness of coming up to someone and how do I start the conversation? What do I say? I look awkward. Like, here, you're almost, it's a lot more natural, because every 3 minutes it's going to change. Like, it takes away some of the problems maybe for an introvert. That's where I was aiming at, for sure. And it makes a lot of sense.
It's not too bad at a conference like this, because you've all got something in common. You're there and you've just listened to a particular talk. So there's something to talk about that you have in common. And you've got your shared passion for gamification going for you. So I think that's fine. And to be honest, I come at this, having taken many of these tests over the years, as I'm borderline introvert, extrovert, like right on the border. You might not think that as a conference speaker, but I have to work at that. So what that means is I kind of sympathize with both sides. And what I find is, once I'm in a networking situation, the extrovert side comes out and I have a chat. But sometimes I need to trick myself into being in that situation in the first place. So I would, for instance, I would click the speed networking button, because I know I would then rise to the occasion. but I could easily lurk and not do that. And the good news is the platform allows people to do either. So you can just come along, you can learn, you can ask Q&A, you can put stuff in the chat, which lots of people quite like to do. Whereas actually, if we get carried away, we can invite people up onto the stage and they can turn their cameras on and ask the question in person. So there's a lot of flexibility in the system. Also, what I quite like about the table system within it is there's a shared whiteboarding system around each little table. Say we've got 100 people in the room, 5 or 6 people around the table. Each one can be having a different chat and sharing stuff on the screen between them, which I think is enables all sorts of possibilities. I have been toying with embedding some games in some of those tables as a surprise as well.
So some surprises coming up. That's cool as well. Is there anything, you already kind of revealed a bit, is there anything else you want or can say?
I'm not going to say any more than that, just because some of them I didn't make work. So I don't want to overpromise. I want to underpromise and then overdeliver for people.
Hopefully, we're looking forward to that. So, you mentioned that there's 5 days that each day has a topic. What are those topics? Maybe get into 1 or 2 speakers of each day. No favorites, but I know all speakers are very, very good and very important. But I don't know if you want to mention a couple, maybe the talks more than the speakers.
Okay.
Anything you want to get into?
I'll do that. So, because I've got 5 days. I did a bit of polling before we launched about what were the most popular topics. So some were really clear. The first day is a learning and education day. By far, one of the biggest sectors for gamification use. The first name I see on that whole page is yours, as you're chairing that day. Yeah. And there's so much. What I want on the learning and education day, and this is the tricky bit for the balance, is I want plenty of information about how we can use it in the corporate sector, not just how academics are using it, because the education side of it is huge as well. There's so many people doing stuff. So the juggling act I've had is balancing that.
And there is, to be fair as well, like not a huge difference as well, not between, for example, higher ed and corporate. There's not a huge difference. There are differences, but there's also differences between higher ed and schools, and even probably between high school and middle school and primary school and so on. So there are like different things and different topics to touch upon in there.
About each of the days of the conference, I feel like I'd run a whole conference around the theme. Yeah, so with education and learning, I'd split it into corporate and academic. I'd also split it into age groups, as you're talking about, because the type of games we have to build for 3 to 6 year olds are very different to 7 to 8 year olds, to 9 to 10 year olds, and so on and so forth. And I think there's a whole lot of learning we can do from that as well. And to be fair, I, as a consultant in the industry, I avoid doing any work in terms of gamifying children's learning, because it's a whole nother set of learnings for me in terms of designing it right, wording it right, the aesthetics. So I stick to adult pedagogy, whether it's in academia or in the corporate world, just to keep life simple for me.
You specialize in what you specialize. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's a shame because there's loads of inquiries about everything. So you can't do it all. I think that's where I started, wasn't it? What do I want to call out? I want to call out the first speaker of the whole conference, Iko Nugroho, who I had an amazing chat with him when I was working out whether to have him on board. And he was living in Germany and he's from Indonesia, and he realized he wanted to make a massive difference in terms of gamifying learning in Indonesia. And I don't want to give away his talk, but he moved back to Indonesia. And then the talk is talking about the decade of his journey, basically building acceptance for gamification and the type of projects they've been able to do and how they've grown and iterated. And he's worked on some big ones now with like 30,000 Indonesia Post employees all over Indonesia, which is a lot of islands.
Wow. And
even ending with what they've built fast this year to cope with the disruption of COVID and the fact that people are working from home, all the rest of it. But he's a highly entertaining speaker, and you can just sense the love of gamification in every word that comes out of his mouth. So for me, that was that's the way to set the scene on the conference. I've got tons of great speakers that day. I'm really pleased to get David Chandros across from Canada to speak. And one of the advantages of a virtual conference is you don't have to worry about getting people to fly places. The only issue I've got with him is you have to get up early in the morning to speak. But I've been trying to get him to come and speak at the conference since the beginning, and it's been hard. But he's got some really interesting takes on. You've probably interviewed him, haven't you?
Yes, indeed. And we've interacted quite a bit in the gamification hub as well, which is, not as active as it used to be, but he's always there.
Yeah. So he's going to go for the sort of more high-end stuff, the mixed reality and simulation, and going complex for doing this. And there's some really interesting things we're going to get out of that. And I do also, to be fair, I want to call out Gustavo Tondello, who I just think he does so much interesting research that is easy to use from a practical point of view as a practitioner. He just supports useful techniques like Andrzej Malczycki's user type Hexad and comes up with just useful ways of applying it. And he's going to come and talk about personalized gameful design, which is very much around, this is what the game industry does now. Everyone has their own experience of playing a game. And he's going to talk about how that works, the type of game elements that can be used. And because he's coming from an academic background to begin with, how to do it at a budget. Which I think would be really useful.
We all struggle with that.
Yeah. But he's got research backing up the type of elements he uses and how to go about designing it. And I just think that's probably, although it's an academic session, one of the most practical ones we'll have in the week. And then it'll be down to you to wrap up that day and explain what we've all learned.
Hopefully. I'll do a decent job at that as well. And what about I'm super interested in education. As you know, we could just spend the rest of the podcast talking about this.
We're not going to let you.
But you're not going to let me for sure. You're not going to do that on the conference either. So to be fair as well, and to understand what the whole conference is about, hopefully get some people excited as well about the conference. What are the rest of the days? What's day 2 look like?
So day 2 is one I've been wanting to do. Right since the early days, and that's health and wellness. And that's because I feel like it's one of the areas where gamification can have the most positive impact for the most people around the whole world. Last year, we had 2 great talks in this space. We had Will Jackson from Play Physio, it brought a tear to some people's eyes. It was called How I Saved a Life Through Gamification, something like that. And we had Adrian Hahn, who was founder of Zombies Run, talking about the things he'd learned. And I realized that this was an area I really wanted to do more on. But also, in this year of disruption, it's probably the most thriving industry in terms of gamification. It's the one where I get more inquiries. There's a lot happening. Gamification COVID has highlighted to people that just putting information in front of them, say about what to do in a pandemic or how to do social distancing, isn't really effective. You're going to have to add something else to it to actually get people to change their behaviors. And so people are looking at gamification as the answer to that. So, call out talks. We've got Toby Beresford, who's spoken at Gamification Europe before, but he's coming to talk about how governments should actually redesign how they put coronavirus metrics out there using gamification techniques so that they actually are more effective at making us take different social distancing decisions. And it's well worth watching a short interview I did with him because he sets 3 problem statements in it that we need to overcome with what's wrong with how everyone is presenting the data. And he's convinced gamification could help and save lots of lives. My keynote speaker that day is Ben Wilkins. I like his business because he's using gamification to motivate people to rehabilitate from arthritis and other musculoskeletal conditions. And these people are generally over 60 years old and don't really care about badges, or other game mechanics. So he's had to work differently. And he's sort of co-created this solution over the past couple of years using humor as a reward instead of badges. So the talk's called Arthritis Memes Business and how they're using memes as a reward structure, amongst other gamification features. And so I think it's really good to have a different take on what the rewards can be for people. And what's great is it's been out there, it's being used, and so there's some actual real impact that we can see from it as well. Yeah. And there's a bunch of other great talks on this day as well.
Absolutely. We can refer to gamification-europe.eu, is it?
.com.
And there you can find all of the details of each of these days. But I wanted to make sure we did a run through all of these days to pique this interest and to see who can be, interested by, having seen or gone in the past years. You can, of course, check out the YouTube videos that have, if I'm not mistaken by now, all of the talks of the past 3 years. Is that right, Pete?
That's absolutely right. Along with over a dozen interviews of speakers from this year about them and about their talks. which is a sneaky thing I've done, actually, so that they don't have to spend time at the beginning of their talk telling us all about themselves, because it's already done. So you can watch that video along with the recording of their actual talk and get the combo. And it enables me to fit more into the conference. So, another way of taking advantage of this digital world.
Yeah. Synchronous and asynchronous, for sure. So what about day 3, Pete? What do you have in store?
You're not exhausted yet? Good. So day 3 is, to be fair, is inspired by Albert Vandermeer's book, Press Start. And in it, he talks a lot about one of his key gamification mechanics is about getting communities behind your brand or whatever you're doing and using gamification to help the community thrive. And that combined with Adrian Hon's talk last year about keeping a whole community engaged for like 6 or 7 years inspired me to think about community as the theme for a day. And then we all went online because of COVID, and people are struggling to keep communities together, to make them cohesive. So how do we do that in a digital place? So there's so much we can do on this day. So Albert's going to actually be the keynote to set the scene and tell us a bit about how to do it. And then I've got some practical talks. I've got Adam Pustai from Hungary talking about how they've been growing a gamification community using gamification. So that's like a tough crowd, in my opinion. So you've got to get it right. And then I've got one of my standout sessions that's people won't know what to expect, which is Sabrina Bruweiler, who is going to be doing a session on how you engage communities through music and gamification.
Huh.
And, I don't want to give too much away, but we might have to create some music together during this session to make that happen.
Sneaky.
Yeah. So that's a bit different. And I think that will work really well online. I'm also going to have a talk I want to call out on this day about esports, because I met Tatiana Taka in the US, who works for Momentum Worldwide, a massive marketing organization. But she did some research and found some research around the fact that in esports, it's become quite a safe place for diversity and inclusion. So they found that a lot of esports fans are female, that they find it a safe place to do stuff. I like the idea of the fact that it's around making games safer for everyone and giving them a space in a community that they can really engage with. And I don't want to give away any more of a talk, but I'm quite excited about what we can learn from that, about making gamification and communities more inclusive for everyone.
Oh, so inclusion in that sense is sort of involved in that day.
Yeah, well, for me, it makes sense to be inclusion on a community day.
Absolutely. So inspired by marketing, basically, it became actually a community day. That's day 3. And you had some interesting thoughts into that. I know one of the things you were thinking about was esports in and of it themselves, but it found its way through this day. All right. So what's in it for day 4?
Day 4 is what I would call the traditional day, which is the marketing and customer loyalty day. This was the easiest one to get a headline sponsor for, which is my returning sponsor, 3 Radical. They've been involved every year since we started, and they're very big in the marketing space. And I've got some amazing speakers on this day, so I'm going to mention at least 3, okay? Sorry. But the first one,
get ready.
The sponsor themselves, they're sending Will Stewart-Jones, who's a really good speaker. But the key thing they noticed is that the pandemic has broken most people's normal marketing techniques. The data that they use is no longer accurate. They don't know how much income people have. They don't know whether they're going to work. They don't know whether they're commuting. All the different touch points they had about where to market to people are not accurate anymore. So the talk they're doing is how they've pivoted and coped with the disruption and are using gamification to really quickly rebuild the data companies have so that they can then personalize the gamification correctly again. So it seems to me like you can use gamification to recover faster than your competitors in the marketing space. So that's a nice way.
Like it.
Yeah, that's a good way to start the day. Then we've got Andrzej Marzuski, who's going to do, I finally got him to get permission to talk about a real case study that they've worked on. So I'm super excited. They're going to talk about how they've gamified a loyalty program for 24 million people for a global fashion retailer.
Yeah, Motivate is doing, like, one of the things that is super interesting about that company. I had a personal chat with the CEO. He also partially lives here in Madrid. Mm-hmm. is like the reach that they have, the capacity of their platform to reach super wide audiences. So I'm pretty excited about knowing that Anjay is going to be revealing some of that and talking about that in more detail.
Yeah, so he's going to be talking about taking loyalty to the next level and people-centric experiences, all created through gamification. So that's great. And I need to call out at the end of the day, and it's only at the end of the day because you'd have to get up really early. We've got Amy Jo Kim coming to talk about game thinking, and for me, she's a no-brainer to fit her in on the marketing day. A lot of what she talks about is around understanding your customer, your player, and how to do this. So we've got some super speakers on that day.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Amy was. I mean, I'm sure she was looking forward to being in Gamification Europe. I think last year there was a stint. In the end, it didn't finally happen for whatever reason. But she is a fantastic speaker. She is. Sorry?
It didn't happen because the flights from San Francisco ended up needing to take like 2 days and cost about $3,000.
Okay, fair enough.
Amongst other reasons, but it was mainly practical. And I've been trying to get Amy to come and speak for 2 or 3 years as well. So this is another moment where going online gives you more flexibility. I've got people coming to speak from Indonesia, from the US, from Canada, from everywhere. And it's a joy in that respect.
Pete, are you crazy? This is Gamification Europe.
But it's about people in Europe gamifying from the best out there. Also, to be honest, why I decided to call it Gamification Europe this year is the key theme is it's the European time zone. So you have to work around European time zone. And then if you're happy to do that, you can attend from anywhere.
That's fantastic. It makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah.
So we just have 1 day left, Pete. What is the last day? Is it a big bang? What is it going to be?
I think it's a big bang. It's the Employee Engagement Day. I think this is the biggest sector of gamification in Europe in terms of spend and how many projects and the size of them. So it's a big day. And we've always got a lot of speakers on this topic each year. What I'm really chuffed at is we've got a new sponsor for this day in Nusta, which is a great platform out of Turkey. So edge of Europe, but that's cool. And within this day, as well as hearing some great case studies from the sponsor, we've got a story we've been trying to get out of Mikhail Van Union for a while, which is around a gamification project that's been running every year since 2003. So this is something successful enough that the customer keeps asking for it every year. They train 1,000 people or more every time. And in fact, across different companies, they've used this game across over 50,000 retail staff over 17 years. So he's learned a lot from this. It's about how training didn't work in the first place. And it's about all the differences you see in the staff themselves. And we're talking about like customer facing retailers and things like that. And what a difference a game makes. So I like the idea that we can have games and gamification that will last for year after year after year. It's really successful.
Absolutely. I like to think it, but I like to think it's not just a wish. It's not just, we should have this. I like to think that we kind of do have it in many places, and there are good examples of this going on out there in the world.
Yeah. And you mentioned like esports was squeezed into the Communities Day. But actually, I've got another session on esports on the Employee Engagement Day because there's a growing trend of getting corporates to enter their staff into esports competitions. There's stuff you can do around learning from esports, using it as a learning tool.
Goodness, we have to talk to my university.
Yeah, well, there are esports schools now.
Yeah.
I have a potential project myself, which is the local region I'm in, wanting to disrupt and be the best in the world at esports. So they're building... what's the word? All the things around it. I've just forgotten the word for it. But all the supporting stuff like super fast broadband, the hubs, the gaming cafes, the kit, the training, the health-related aspects of it, all of that. What can we do to be world leading in esports? It's such a big growing program. There's at least 2 universities in the UK now with degrees in esports that you can take as well. One of which is in this area, which is why I think we're taking...
Yeah, employee engagement. But I know of some of the people who are doing that, but I was just getting excited for a very, very individualistic, very egocentric reason. I said, why am I not in the league playing these kinds of things in my day job? That could be very exciting, don't you think?
Why is there not a Professor Game team?
Interesting.
I think so.
Interesting. We'll see how we can go about that in the future for sure.
Yeah.
There should be.
What?
I know there's an Intellisis team.
Yeah. They were one of the first gamifiers to sponsor a team. I quite like that, I have to admit.
Yeah.
I talked about it with my staff last year, but no one could agree on the game.
That's a tough one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, the one session I want to wrap up with is the very last panel session of the conference, which is super focused just on gamification in recruitment.
Okay.
Which I think, because I could have spun out a whole nother day on this topic as well, because there's so many different areas it's being used, from employer branding through to gamified psychometric testing to the onboarding of new employees and things like that. And the panel sessions about how recruitment is becoming, I guess, radically affected by gamification. I've got the chair of it, David Dand, who's actually set up a company just to do recruitment in the gamification space. So if you need a chief gamification officer, you go to them, right? Because, it's a growing industry for this. And the first panelist I want to announce is Danilo Bulatovic, who is like a regional talent sourcing manager for Nestle. And I was speaking to them a while back, but partly because of COVID, actually. They wanted a way to quickly find out which members of staff they have and their potential employees had a digital mindset. And so what we were looking at was gamified ways of finding out who has a digital mindset. And in fact, I was able, within like a day, I was able to find 3 companies that had already done gamified psychometric testing or behavior testing that would be able to do that at scale, because they're looking at testing like 50,000 to 100,000 people a year, both internal employees and external. So he's coming at it from this like big scale, but also digital mindsets. They want to make sure all their recruits can handle all this disruption around us. So I feel like I'm starting and ending the conference with 2 super on-theme disruption-based talks.
Absolutely. It sounds like it for sure. I mean, we're starting with education, and we're ending as well with employee engagement, but also not just employee engagement. That very interesting talk that you were mentioning, it seems like there's going to be many exciting things going on. And I thought, to be honest, we might have maybe too much time initially just to talk about the conference, but we're already around 30 minutes. So I want to actually see how we can wrap this up. There's like 2 curiosities I have out of this. The first one is, of course, this is a digital conference. So you would be thinking, like, if the other ones were recorded, will this conference be recorded? How is it going to work? Like, if I get a ticket, do I need to be there live? Because I'm not arguing against being live. I definitely think that there's a lot of networking opportunities, many things that can be done live. But the big question is, do I have to be there live? What are the benefits of being live? Like, what does that look like? And of course, tell us how we can get those tickets. How can we make sure that we don't miss out on Gamification Europe Online 2020?
Okay. So one of the key paradigm changes this year was, because it's online, it changes all the financial aspects of it. So I don't know if you remember, but for the past few years, I've charged a big ticket price, at least €500 generally, to attend, to make sure that the people who come are really passionate about the subject, but also to cover all the costs of doing an in-person event. This time, spun it round, and I'm using sponsors each day to cover all the costs, because it's just the digital platform, the design, and all the marketing and so on. And I've gone for as cheap a ticket price as I can. So the super early bird tickets are just £10 instead of €300 or €500 last time. And because what I want to do with that is enable as many people as possible to attend, even if they don't attend all day, but it's only a 5-hour day, and attend just the day that they're interested in as well. I'm not really expecting anyone to attend all 5 days. Although a few people have bought tickets for all 5 days just to keep me on my toes. So it's very affordable. So you might as well go and get the networking. But yes, of course, we'll record every talk. But of course, if you're there, you can ask questions. And in the networking breaks, go and ask the actual speaker those questions. More difficult to do that when you're watching it on YouTube 6 months later. Because you may or may not know that what we do is we record all the talks, but then we release them basically one a week or one a month, depending on how fast we process them, in the run-up of the next year to the next conference. So although you would eventually get to watch them for free, you might have to wait a whole year for your favorite one.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a good argument as well for the immediacy, in the sense that, yeah, I can be online, I can watch it whenever I want to, but whenever I want to is not a day in the week, it's not a day in the calendar either. And it probably will happen that you might never get to see it. Like, I think it's easier and more real to think, oh, I really like this talk and I'm going to watch it again because I really enjoyed it. And there's some details I missed because I had to nip to the toilet or whatever happened. Or I was at the other track and I can listen to this one I was really interested in as well, than saying I'm going to go through a whole conference or through the 10 talks I was interested in months later or even weeks later. There's not the excitement, there's not that push through of having those things. So I definitely think there is a very, very good argument for being there.
Yeah, I mean, also one of the things I do is I pretty much insist on all the speakers doing it live rather than pre-recorded. I think it gives you an extra edge, and they can also answer the questions that are raised as well. I do have a couple of people who are doing pre-recorded talks, what I call poster sessions, where they're only like 5 minutes long. So I can use them to just spark a little bit of interest, but not do a full talk. I think they're quite useful.
Absolutely. It makes sense as well to have people who are also using sort of that capability that was not previously there, which is, being able to do it from, the distance, from different time. But there is, I completely agree that there is a very important argument to be said about, attending live and all the benefits that can come from that for sure.
Yeah, I think so. The point is you're there to meet other people as well as listen to the speakers. The point of a good conference is to catch up with people, to meet new people, to learn new stuff, to be inspired. And some of that only happens if you're there at the conference itself. For sure it does.
I completely agree. So Pete, thank you very much for, first off, as I've said it every single year, especially last year when I had the opportunity to be on stage and thank everyone there. But especially, I always like to thank you guys because I know this is a very big effort. I mean, even if you forego the financial aspect, which is, I'm not saying it's not important, but even if you go just and forget about that, the whole effort of organizing this, I know there is a very, very good argument for it to be a pretty tall mountain to climb. And not everybody's going to be willing to do these kinds of things. The commitment it requires is very, very large. And again, I'd like to thank you for even just for organizing and being involved in this whole thing, because I think it is a very important benefit for the whole community of gamification. So again, first off, thank you for that. Thank you for being with us today and giving all these teasers so that we might or might not, which is also a possibility, be interested in Gamification Europe 2020. Also making, I don't know if that effort or having this new mindset of being able to reduce the tickets, which allows for more people to be able to attend, open up to more members of the community. Of course, not having to travel and having a lower ticket price massively reduces the barriers of participation. Hopefully, it also means there's a lot more people, there's a lot more participation, and there is a lot larger community. So thank you for all of those things, Pete. Let's keep on doing great stuff. However, at least for now and for today, as you know, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And this podcast only makes sense with you. So let's go ahead and connect on Twitter. That way you can make me questions. You can tell me if you're going to Gamification Europe, for example, as we were talking today. If you are looking forward to some guests, if you have questions, we want to know everything you want to tell us. So you can find my Twitter account in professorgame.com/Twitter. I'm always sharing content on these very interesting topics of gamification, game thinking, and game-based solutions, especially in education. And hey, don't click continue yet. Have you subscribed using your favorite podcast app? Well, go ahead and do so. That way you will listen to the next episode of the Professor Game Podcast. See you there.